The first time I laid eyes on Don Valerio Rossi, he was nothing but a dark figure, a silhouette of violence framed by the blazing Neapolitan sunset. He stood there on the dock, the salty wind whipping his perfectly tailored coat around him, while two of his goons tossed a man bound, gagged, and weeping into the dark, churning waters of the Bay of Naples. There wasn't even a splash, not really. Just a gulp from the sea, a final, desperate breath swallowed by the wind, and then nothing. It was a Tuesday of all days. I remember because I was supposed to be putting the finishing touches on my doctoral thesis, on the linguistic patterns of coercion in southern Italian dialects, no less. Instead, I was getting a front-row seat to the ultimate example of coercion playing out in real life. My name is Dr. Elysia Marino, and for the past 6 months, I'd been trying to get an audience with the most elusive and powerful crime boss in Campania. Not to study his criminal empire, mind you, but to beg for my father's life. My father, a small-time accountant with a gambling problem that was eating him alive, had made the disastrous mistake of trying to skim a little off the top from the Rossis. It wasn't a huge amount, just enough to cover a debt he owed to some two-bit family. But betrayal is betrayal, and the price is always the same. I'd pulled every academic and political string I had, called in every favor I was owed. But the message was always the same, relayed through a series of increasingly terrified intermediaries. Don Valerio doesn't grant audiences to the daughters of thieves. He settles his accounts personally. So, I took the only option I had left. I used my research. I studied his habits, the restaurants he frequented, the shady social clubs where he conducted his business. I memorized the license plates of his fleet of black sedans. And then, I planted myself in this little cafe overlooking the private marina. He used a marina that was basically a fortress, carved into the cliffs above us. I'd been coming here for 3 weeks straight, dropping a small fortune on espresso and cornetto, slowly becoming part of the scenery. The servers knew me as the quiet, studious woman with the towering stack of books. They had no idea my heart was like a frantic bird, beating itself bloody against the cage of my ribs. And then today he showed up, not in a motorcade, but on foot, accompanied by a small entourage of 3 men who moved with the deadly grace of panthers. He conducted his business, that chilling, efficient disposal of a problem, as if he were just taking a leisurely stroll. My academic mind, the part of me that should have been horrified, was instead clinically fascinated. The body language wasn't that of anger, but of absolute bored authority. This wasn't a crime of passion, it was administrative. As he turned away from the water, his gaze, as dark and unforgiving as the deep water he just used as a makeshift grave, swept across the piazza. It was a predator's scan, missing nothing. It passed over the old men playing scopa, over the tourists sketching the Castel Nuovo, over the servers, and then it stopped on me. It was like being physically pinned to the spot. His eyes weren't just brown. They were the color of ancient obsidian, and they held a depth of calculation that stole my breath. He knew I didn't belong. He knew I was watching. For one terrifying, exhilarating second, our eyes locked across the 100 meters of sun-washed cobblestones. I didn't look away. Couldn't. My father's life hung in the balance. I saw a flicker of something in his expression. Not curiosity, not yet, but a recognition of an anomaly, a variable he hadn't accounted for. He said something to the man on his left, a giant with a scar bisecting his eyebrow, who then turned his own icy gaze on me. Then, Don Valerio turned and walked away, his men falling into step around him, their figures disappearing into the maze of narrow streets leading up to the Vomero district. The spell was broken. I let out a shaky breath I hadn't even realized I'd been holding. My hands were trembling so violently that I had to grip them together on the table. I had done it. I had gotten his attention. Now, I had to hope it was the kind of attention that led to a negotiation and not a midnight visit from the man with the scar. I paid my bill, my movements automatic, my mind racing. I had to be prepared. He would have me investigated. He'd know who I was by nightfall. The element of surprise was gone. All I had left were my wits and my knowledge. My phone buzzed in my bag. It was my mother. Her calls were a constant, anxious refrain. "Alessia," Any news? Have you heard anything? Her voice was thin, stretched tight with a fear that had become her constant companion. Not yet, Mama, I said, forcing a calm I didn't feel into my voice. But I'm making progress. I have a lead. It was a lie, but a necessary one. Telling her I had just stared down the man who held our fate in his hands would have sent her into a full-blown panic. He called again, Alessia, the one your father owes. He said, if we don't have the money by the end of the week, they won't just hurt your father. They'll come for us, for me. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. The Calabrians. They were less administrative than the Rossis. Their violence was personal, theatrical. I know, Mama. I know. I'm handling it. Stay home. Don't answer the door for anyone. I ended the call, leaning my head against the cool stone wall of the cafe. The weight of it all was crushing. 2 sets of wolves at the door, and my only weapon was a PhD. Felt absurd, laughable. I gathered my books and walked back to my tiny apartment in the Spanish Quarter. The streets were a chaotic, vibrant symphony of life, but it all felt completely alien to me. I was a ghost moving through it, my reality a narrow, desperate tunnel. My apartment was a 3rd-floor walk-up, cramped and dim, but it had a small balcony overlooking a courtyard where laundry fluttered like faded flags. It was there, as I was unlocking my door, that I felt it, a presence. The air had changed. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I turned slowly. The man with the scar was standing at the end of the hallway, leaning against the stairwell banister. He wasn't looking at me. He was examining his fingernails with an air of profound boredom, but his posture was that of a coiled spring. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. So soon. I fumbled with the key, my hands slick with sweat, and finally got the door open. I slipped inside, locking it behind me, my back pressed against the wood as if that could keep him out. I waited, listening. I heard no footsteps, no knock. After 5 minutes of silence, I risked a glance through the peephole. The hallway was empty. Had I imagined it? No. The impression of him was too vivid, too menacing. It was a message, a reminder. We know where you live. I spent the evening in a state of heightened alert, jumping at every sound from the courtyard. I tried to work on my thesis, but the text on the screen blurred. All I could see was Don Valerio's face, the cold, detached power in his eyes. He wasn't a monster from a storybook. He was worse. He was a man who saw human lives as entries on a balance sheet. My father was a liability. I was an anomaly. Around midnight, as I was finally drifting into a fitful sleep, my phone buzzed again. Not a call. A text message from an unknown number. It contained no words, just an address and a time. Via San Biagio dei Libri, 1400 hours tomorrow. The blood drained from my face. Via San Biagio dei Libri was a narrow, crowded street in the heart of the historic center. A public place, a safe place, or a place where a person could disappear without a trace, swallowed by the crowds and the ancient stone. I didn't know, but I knew I had no choice. This was the audience I had begged for. I typed out a single-word reply, my finger hovering over the send button for a long moment before I pressed it. Va bene. Okay. The shop, Illinois Cartillo, was nestled between a pasticceria and a shop selling grotesque, beautiful porcelain figurines. It looked ancient, its oak door warped with age and humidity, a brass bell hanging overhead. At precisely noon, my hand was slick on the cool, tarnished handle. I took a deep breath, the scent of sugar, espresso, and old wood filling my lungs, and pushed the door open. The bell jingled, a cheerful, mundane sound that was utterly dissonant with the churning terror in my veins. The interior was a cave of knowledge, smelling of aged paper, leather, and dust. Floor-to-ceiling shelves were crammed with books, their spines cracked and faded. A single green-shaded lamp cast a pool of warm light on a massive, scarred wooden desk piled high with manuscripts and maps. And behind that desk sat Don Valerio Rossi. He wasn't looking at me. He was studying a large, yellowed folio, his long, elegant fingers tracing the lines of what looked like a nautical chart. He wore a simple dark sweater, no suit jacket, no visible armor of any kind. He looked younger like this, more like a scholar or a collector, the sharp, predatory lines of his face softened by the lamplight. It was a carefully constructed illusion, and I wasn't fooled for a second. The man with the scar, who I now knew was his capo, Luca, stood by a bookshelf near the back, ostensibly examining a set of Dante's Divine Comedy. His presence was a cold anchor in the room, a reminder of the reality outside this quiet bubble. I stood there just inside the door, unsure of what to do. Announce myself? Curtsy? My academic training hadn't covered the protocol for meeting a crime lord in an antique bookshop. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, Valerio spoke without looking up. Dr. Marino. His voice was exactly as I remembered it from my imagination. A low baritone, smooth as aged whiskey with the faintest rasp of Naples in its depths. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. He knew exactly who I was. You are punctual, a rare and admirable quality. He finally lifted his gaze from the folio, and those obsidian eyes pinned me to the spot. The intensity was undiminished by the cozy setting. If anything, it was heightened here in this intimate space. His presence was overwhelming. Thank you for seeing me, Don Valerio, I said, my voice thankfully steady, betraying none of the earthquake happening inside me. I took a few steps forward, stopping at a respectful distance from the desk, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. He gestured to the heavy leather chair opposite him. Sit. It was not a request. I sat perched on the edge of the chair, my back straight, my hands clasped in my lap to hide their trembling. I was in the lion's den. Now I had to convince the lion not to eat me. He closed the folio with a soft thud and leaned back, steepling his fingers. He studied me with a disconcerting, analytical focus. I felt like a specimen under a microscope, every flaw, every fear laid bare. You have been a very persistent ghost, Dr. Marino, haunting my cafes, my routes. You cost me 2 good men I had to reassign to determine if you were a threat. My breath hitched. I didn't realize. Of course you didn't, he said, a flicker of something that might have been amusement in his dark eyes. A threat would have been more careful or more competent. You, however, are merely desperate. The word landed like a slap. It was true, but hearing him say it with that cool, clinical detachment was humiliating. My father. He held up a hand, silencing me. The gesture was absolute. Your father, Enzo Marino, is a thief. He stole 30,000 euros from me. He did it clumsily, thinking no one would notice such a small amount. He was wrong. The amount is irrelevant. The principle is everything. He was desperate, too, I whispered, the fight leaching out of me. He owes the Calabrians. They threaten my mother. Valerio's expression did not change. The Calabrians are animals, but that is not my concern. Your father's poor judgment in his choice of creditors does not absolve him of his crime against me. I know, I said, forcing myself to meet his gaze. This was it, my only chance. I am not here to ask you to absolve him. I am here to propose a transaction. One dark eyebrow arched infinitesimally. A transaction? You have something I want, my father's life, his safety from your organization. And I have something you might find valuable. A faint, cynical smile touched his lips. I am a wealthy man, Dr. Marino. What could a PhD student, drowning in her father's debts, possibly offer me? I took a deep breath. This was the gamble. My research isn't just about dialects. It's about power structures, communication, and the vulnerabilities within them. Information, I said. Analysis. You run a vast organization. It's a complex ecosystem of loyalties, rivalries, and communication. My doctoral work is on the linguistics of coercion and loyalty in southern Italian syndicates. I can analyze patterns in intercepted communications, identify potential betrayals based on linguistic shifts, and profile your allies and your enemies through their speech patterns and word choices. I can tell you who is loyal, who is fearful, and who is planning to stab you in the back. The room was silent, except for the faint ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. Luca had stopped pretending to read Dante and was watching me, his expression unreadable. Valerio had gone perfectly still. The air grew thick, heavy with the weight of my audacity. I had just offered a Mafia don my services as a corporate psychologist for his criminal empire. He leaned forward slowly, the leather of his chair creaking. The lamplight carved shadows under his cheekbones, making him look both more severe and more compelling. You are suggesting I employ you as a consultant? Yes. You believe you can look at my organization, my world, and, from the safety of your university library, understand its inner workings well enough to predict its fractures? Not from the library, I said, my throat dry. I would need access to certain non-sensitive communications, to sit in on lower-level meetings, to observe. His smile was slow and dangerous. You are either courageous, Dr. Marino, or foolish. My world eats brave, stupid girls for breakfast. I am neither, I said, a spark of defiance igniting within me. I am a scientist, and you have a problem with organizational integrity. I am offering you a tool to solve it, and in return you forgive my father's debt, you make the problem with the Calabrians disappear, and you guarantee my family's safety permanently. He was silent for a long time, his gaze boring into me, weighing my soul. I held my breath, my entire future balanced on the edge of his decision. Finally he spoke, his voice soft but absolute. No. The single word felt like a physical blow. It sucked the air from my lungs. All my planning, my desperation, my hope, shattered. I felt the hot sting of tears behind my eyes and fought them back furiously. I would not cry in front of this man. I started to rise, my legs weak. I see. Then I apologize for wasting your time. Sit down, Dr. Marino. The command was like a whip crack. I froze halfway out of my chair and slowly sank back down. I do not make deals with amateurs, he said, his voice cold. And I do not grant clemency based on theoretical promises. You ask me to trust your science, but trust is earned. You want to save your father? Prove your value. How? I asked, my voice a ragged whisper. He picked up a pen from his desk, a heavy silver fountain pen, and began to turn it over in his fingers. I will give you a test, a single non-sensitive intercepted message. You will analyze it. You will tell me everything you can deduce about the author, his intentions, and his loyalties. If your analysis is correct, and more importantly useful, we will discuss your proposal further. He let the sentence hang in the air, the unspoken consequence more terrifying than any specific threat. And my father? The Calabrians have given us until the end of the week. Your father's situation remains unchanged, he said flatly. Consider this an incentive for you to be both brilliant and swift. It wasn't kind. It was a deliberate application of pressure, a way to ensure I was operating from a place of pure desperation. And it was working. I had no choice. I had to play his game. I accept, I said. He gave a curt nod and slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. It was a printout of a text message conversation in Italian. The names were redacted, replaced with initials. You have 24 hours, Don Valerio said. Luca will see you out. I took the paper, my fingers trembling. I didn't look at it. I stood, my legs only slightly unsteady, and turned to leave. As I reached the door, his voice stopped me again. Dr. Marino. I glanced back. He was watching me, the pen still in his hand, his expression unreadable. Do not disappoint me. Luca opened the door for me, his scarred face impassive. I stepped out into the bright, noisy chaos of Spaccanapoli, the sheet of paper clutched in my hand like a lifeline. The bright Neapolitan sun was a shocking contrast to the dim, silent intensity of the bookshop. I felt like I had been underwater for a long time and had just broken the surface, gasping for air. I found a small, secluded bench in a nearby piazza, my mind reeling. I had done it. I had gotten my foot in the door. But the price of failure was now unimaginably high. I looked down at the paper in my hands, the first and only test between my father and his grave. I unfolded it and began to read. The messages were brief, seemingly innocuous, a discussion about a shipment of ceramics from a factory in Caserta. But as my trained eyes scanned the words, the patterns began to emerge. The use of the formal lay where two would be expected between colleagues, the specific, almost archaic slang used for money, the unusual repetition of a particular phrase, a verbal tic that suggested anxiety. This was no simple business memo. This was a coded conversation. And my PhD, the very thing that had felt so useless in the face of brute violence, was suddenly the most powerful weapon I had. I took a deep breath, the academic in me taking over, pushing the fear aside. I had 24 hours to prove to a Mafia don that I was valuable enough to let live. I started to work. The words on the page blurred and sharpened as my focus intensified. The world around me, the shrieking laughter of children chasing pigeons, the distant wail of a Vespa, the rich smell of baking pizza, faded into a dull hum. My entire existence narrowed to the sequence of characters, the spaces between them, the rhythm and cadence of a conversation that was meant to sound mundane. My initial read was correct. This was a code, but not a complex substitution cipher. It was more sophisticated. It was linguistic camouflage, using the natural flow of Neapolitan dialect to hide its true intent. The first message, from C, read, Z. The shipment of those ceramics from the Caserta factory is delayed. The master says the clay isn't right. They need another week to fire the new batch. On the surface, it was a simple business update. But the word Z, a contraction of Zio or uncle, was interesting. It was a term of respect, even endearment. But in this context, it felt performative, a deliberate signal of subservience. The second message, from G, was the reply, "A week is too long. The buyers for these particular pieces are impatient men. Tell the master to use the old clay. We've sold pieces from it before without complaint." This was the key. The old clay. My mind, trained to find patterns in linguistic stress and semantic fields, latched onto it. Why specify old clay when discussing a delay caused by bad clay? It was a non sequitur unless clay wasn't clay at all. I pulled out my laptop and connected to the shaky public Wi-Fi. I cross-referenced the phrase vecchia argilla, or old clay, against my database of regional idioms and known criminal jargon. Nothing direct came up, but then I thought about the context. A shipment, buyers, impatience. I tried a different tack, searching for slang related to narcotics. Cocaine was often called pulvera or powder, but sometimes, in older slang, it was referred to as bianca or white. Clay didn't fit. Then it hit me. Not narcotics, weapons, guns. The clay could refer to either the material itself or its base components. The old clay could be a specific, perhaps inferior, source for firearms. Or, given the Rossi family's known grip on port operations and shipping, it could be something else entirely, counterfeit goods, stolen antiquities. I leaned back, closing my eyes, letting the syntax wash over me. The master, the buyers, the clay. It was a supply chain problem. But the language used by G was aggressive, dismissive of the master's concerns. Tell the master to use the old clay. That wasn't a suggestion. It was an order disguised as one. The power dynamic was wrong. C was reporting a problem from a position of relaying information. G was commanding a solution from a position of authority. But the use of Z from C suggested he was the subordinate. The pieces didn't fit the stated hierarchy. I opened my eyes and looked at the messages again, this time ignoring the literal meaning and focusing solely on the psychological subtext. The anxiety in C's message was palpable in the repetition of "isn't right" and the specific time frame of "another week." He was nervous. G's response was impatient, cutting, and involved a deliberate decision to compromise on quality for speed. He was risking the product, and by extension the reputation of the business, to appease these impatient buyers. Why? My thesis had a whole chapter on loyalty signals in high-stakes environments. One of the key indicators of a potential betrayer was a sudden shift in priority away from the group's long-term stability and toward a short-term personal gain. G was prioritizing the immediate satisfaction of these new buyers over the master's quality control. This wasn't just a business dispute. It smelled of a side deal, a shadow operation using the Rossi infrastructure. I spent hours building a profile. C was. Here's the translated and rewritten text in American English, expanded and elaborated for depth. He seemed to be a mid-level player, clearly apprehensive, caught in a bind between a superior he held in esteem, the master, and this imposing figure G, who was pressuring him into a seriously dicey undertaking. This G character reeked of arrogance, overflowing ambition, and a clear motivation for financial gain. He was blatantly cutting corners, and the demanding tone he used suggested he genuinely believed he was untouchable, or perhaps that his new benefactors wielded enough power to completely shield him. The key element here was these impatient men. They represented the external factor, the undeniable catalyst behind this act of betrayal. The big question was, who exactly were they? Rivals from within? Were they connected to the Calabrians? Some outside cartel muscling in? The message didn't spell it out, but the simple fact that this pressure existed, and how G reacted to it, exposed a critical vulnerability. I systematically compiled all my findings, meticulously typing up a concise and clinically detached report. I deliberately avoided any emotionally charged language or unsubstantiated speculation. I made a conscious effort to stick strictly to the hard data. The anomalous and out-of-place usage of Z, the semantic inconsistency surrounding the reference to old clay, the demonstrably skewed power dynamic at play, and the revealing psychological profiles of all the parties involved. All these factors pointed toward an internal faction operating well outside established protocols, all driven by the pursuit of personal profit. My conclusion was that G was very likely diverting resources or perhaps running an entirely unauthorized operation, and that his new associates potentially compromised his loyalty to the established hierarchy. As I typed the final period, marking the end of my report, the sun was sinking rapidly below the roofline of the piazza, casting long, stretching shadows that seemed to deepen the gathering dusk. The allotted 24 hours were almost up. I had absolutely no viable way to contact Don Valerio directly. I had to assume that Luca would find me somehow. The thought, admittedly, was somewhat unsettling. I uploaded the finished document to my secure cloud drive and then closed my laptop, a feeling of resignation washing over me. My body ached with a fatigue that was more mental and emotional than strictly physical. I had genuinely done all that I possibly could. Now all that remained was to wait. I bought a panino from a nearby bar, a simple sandwich to curb my hunger, but I ate it almost mechanically without truly tasting it. My senses were on high alert, acutely scanning every face in the dwindling crowd. Every time a large man walked by, my heart would skip an erratic beat, adrenaline surging through my veins. It was fully dark, the sky a deep, star-studded black, when I finally decided to head back to my apartment. The narrow, winding streets of the Spanish Quarter were even more chaotic and alive at night, filled with the vibrant energy of 1,000 different lives intersecting, diverging, and swirling around me. Despite the activity, I felt a profound sense of isolation, a feeling of being adrift in this vast, bustling sea of humanity. I was just fumbling with my keys, trying to unlock my apartment door, when a black sedan, sleek and silent, glided smoothly to a stop at the curb right in front of me. My blood ran cold instantly, a primal fear gripping me. The passenger window silently slid down, revealing Luca's stoic face. He didn't utter a single word, just gave a sharp, almost imperceptible jerk of his head towards the back seat of the car. The message couldn't have been clearer if he had shouted it. Get in. This was it. The moment of truth. The judgment. I instinctively clutched my laptop bag tightly to my chest, as if it could somehow serve as a shield against what was to come, and walked slowly towards the car, my legs feeling heavy and unresponsive, like they were made of wood instead of flesh and bone. I slid into the back seat of the sedan. The interior was cool and subtly scented with the mingled aromas of fine leather and expensive cologne. Don Valerio was conspicuously absent. It was just Luca and a driver I didn't recognize. The doors automatically locked with a soft, strangely definitive thud, sealing my fate. Luca didn't even glance in my direction. He stared straight ahead, his expression unreadable, as the car pulled smoothly back into the flow of traffic. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice sounding strangely small and weak in the luxurious, almost oppressive silence of the car. "You'll see," Luca said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that didn't invite further inquiry. We didn't head towards the familiar bookshop or the sprawling villa in Vomero. Instead, we wound our way through the labyrinthine city streets, heading inexorably towards the industrial port area. The cheerful, welcoming lights of the city center gradually gave way to the harsh, almost alien orange glow of sodium vapor lamps, illuminating rows of nondescript warehouses, shipping containers stacked precariously high like giant, rust-colored Lego bricks, and the hulking skeletal shadows of cranes silhouetted against the inky night sky. The car finally stopped beside a nondescript warehouse, its corrugated metal door firmly rolled down and secured. Luca got out of the car and then deliberately opened my door. "Out!" he commanded, his tone brooking no argument. I obeyed without hesitation, my heart hammering wildly against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear. This definitely wasn't the setting for some congratulatory meeting or a pat on the back. This felt much more like the grim prelude to an execution. An image of my father flashed vividly in my mind. Unbidden. Had I been fundamentally wrong in my assessment? Had my entire analysis been fatally flawed? And was this the inevitable consequence? Luca led me to a small, reinforced steel door set into the side of the warehouse. He rapped on it twice, paused deliberately, then knocked once more. Prearranged code, no doubt. The door buzzed electronically and then swung open inward with a creak. The space inside was vast and mostly empty, save for a few wooden crates stacked haphazardly against a far wall. In the center of the concrete floor, under the harsh glare of a single bare hanging light bulb, stood Don Valerio. And kneeling before him, his hands bound tightly behind his back, was a man I instantly recognized from my frantic research into the Rossi organization. Giancuso G. His face was badly bruised and bloody, one eye swollen completely shut, a grotesque parody of a human face. He was breathing in ragged, wet gasps, each breath a struggle. Valerio stood over him, his posture relaxed and almost casual, his hands tucked nonchalantly into the pockets of his trousers. He looked as unnervingly calm and composed as if he were simply waiting for a bus to arrive. He glanced up almost casually as we entered, his obsidian gaze flicking briefly from Luca to me, assessing the situation in an instant. "Dr. Marino," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "Your report was insightful," he said with a chilling detachment, and then gestured with a slight nod of his head towards the broken man kneeling at his feet. "As you so accurately deduced, Giancuso here was surreptitiously using my shipping lanes to move counterfeit pharmaceuticals from a contact in Bulgaria, the old clay you identified. Furthermore, he was cutting the agreed-upon product with cheap fillers in order to increase his own personal profit margin, selling the diluted product to a new, particularly eager clientele in Marseilles, the impatient men. My analysis had been absolutely correct. A wave of dizzying relief washed over me, so potent and overwhelming that my knees actually felt weak and unsteady. I had passed the test. Valerio began to circle Giancuso slowly and deliberately, like a predator sizing up its prey. He believed his operation was small enough to go completely unnoticed. He also believed that his position within the organization made him untouchable, immune to any consequences. He was demonstrably wrong on both counts. He stopped directly behind Giancuso and looked directly at me, his gaze unwavering. "You astutely identified the linguistic stress markers, the underlying power imbalance, the semantic dissonance. You saw the fundamental crack in the foundation from a single sheet of paper. Tell me, Doctor, what is the appropriate response to a betrayal of this particular nature?" He was testing me again, but this was a far deeper, more brutal test than anything I had faced before. He was essentially asking me to pronounce a sentence, to actively participate in the judgment. I looked at Giancuso, seeing the sheer, naked animal terror reflected in his one good eye. This was no longer some abstract academic exercise. This was chillingly real. A man's very life was hanging precariously in the balance, and Don Valerio was deliberately placing the scales of justice, or rather injustice, directly into my hands. My mouth suddenly went dry, a wave of nausea rising in my throat. I thought of my father, the fear he had carried for so long. I thought of the unfortunate man who had been unceremoniously thrown into the bay. This was the world I was actively seeking to enter. This was the steep price of my family's continued safety and well-being. I met Valerio's unwavering gaze directly, managing to keep my own voice surprisingly steady when I finally spoke. "The response must be absolute," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "To do otherwise simply invites further infection, further betrayal." A slow, approving smile touched Valerio's lips, a chillingly satisfied expression. "You have potential, Dr. Marino," he said softly, his voice barely audible as Lucas stepped forward, ready to carry out his unspoken orders. "We will discuss your proposal at length. Wait for me in the car." I didn't look back, couldn't bear to witness what was about to happen. I simply turned and walked deliberately out of the warehouse, the sound of my footsteps echoing ominously on the hard concrete floor, the only sound in my ears. I didn't dare look back as I heard the heavy warehouse door shut firmly behind me, irrevocably closing off whatever brutal scene was about to unfold. I got back into the car, my body strangely numb and detached. I had passed the test, or so it seemed. I had secured the deal I had so desperately sought. And in doing so, I had effectively condemned a man to his predetermined fate. I had become irrevocably a part of the machine. The driver didn't speak, didn't even acknowledge my presence. I sat in the silent, perfumed darkness of the car, staring blankly at my own reflection in the tinted window, wondering with a growing sense of unease exactly what I had just become. Unlike the cozy chaos of Il Cartillo, this opulent space made a stark statement about power. Floor-to-ceiling shelves stretched as far as the eye could see, holding thousands upon thousands of books, all meticulously organized and catalogued. A large, modern desk made of dark, highly polished wood stood near a window that offered a breathtaking view out over a manicured garden, the distant city lights of Naples twinkling far below like a scattering of fallen stars. On the desk sat a brand-new computer, a neat stack of notebooks, and a secure, encrypted communication device. "This is where you will work," Valerio said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast, unervingly quiet room. "The system on that computer is completely isolated. You can freely access the files I provide for you, but you cannot send or receive any external communications from it. Your personal phone and laptop will be routinely scanned and monitored. This is as much for your own safety as it is for my security." He walked deliberately over to the desk and picked up a single file folder, its contents unknown to me. "Your first official assignment," he stated, his tone brooking no argument. "A series of intercepted conversations between 3 captains currently overseeing our operations along the Amalfi coast. I want you to determine if the recent pressure we've been experiencing from the Camorra and the Cerno is causing any ideological shifts within their ranks." He held out the folder towards me, an implicit order. I took it from him, my fingers brushing briefly against his as I did so. A sudden jolt, sharp and completely unexpected, shot up my arm like a surge of electricity. My eyes flew involuntarily to his. For a fleeting fraction of a second, I saw something flicker deep within those dark, impenetrable depths. It wasn't calculation, and it wasn't the cold, detached assessment I had come to expect. It was a spark of something far more primal and immediate, a raw, undiluted awareness. It was gone almost as quickly as it had appeared, instantly replaced by his customary impenetrable mask of composure. But I had undeniably seen it, and I knew with absolute certainty that he had felt it too. This dangerous, undeniable electric current that arced so unexpectedly between us. He took a slow, deliberate step closer, and the air in the room seemed to thin perceptibly, becoming noticeably difficult to breathe. He was now close enough that I could see the faint shadow of stubble along his jawline, a subtle imperfection that only made him seem more dangerously real. close enough to smell the clean, sharp scent of his skin, a scent that was uniquely his own. He reached out almost tentatively and, with a surprising gentleness, tucked a stray strand of my hair behind my ear, his touch lingering for a moment longer than necessary. His fingertips grazed my cheek, and it felt like a brand, searing itself into my memory. "Do not mistake this for kindness, Elysia," he said, his voice a low, intimate murmur that seemed to vibrate deep within my very bones, sending shivers down my spine. "You are a valuable asset to me. I protect my assets, of course, but you are also now firmly entrenched in my world. That means my rules, my command." His gaze dropped almost imperceptibly to my lips for a fleeting heartbeat before returning to meet my eyes, the intensity of his stare almost unnerving. "The woman you were back in the piazza, the desperate girl clutching her books, is gone, Elysia. She would not have survived the night. The woman who stood in the warehouse and delivered a correct, if ruthless, assessment. She is the one I am investing in now. Do not give me any reason to regret my investment." He turned abruptly and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the center of the magnificent library, the file folder clutched tightly in my trembling hands, the phantom touch of his fingers still burning insistently on my skin. I was finally safe. My family was safe and secure. I had ostensibly gotten everything I had asked for, everything I had so desperately craved. So why, then, did I feel like I had just jumped headfirst from a relatively minor frying pan directly into the very heart of the fire itself? I walked numbly to the window and looked down at the sprawling city below. My old life was down there in those tiny, illuminated streets, a life of largely inconsequential academic debates, cheap wine shared with friends, and worrying incessantly about mounting student loans. It felt like a million miles away, a distant memory from another lifetime. I was now up here in the dragon's lair, and the dragon had just made it abundantly clear that he found me interesting. I looked down at the file in my hands, a tangible representation of my new reality. It was simultaneously my leash and my lifeline. I sat down heavily at the expensive desk in the silent, gilded cage, and I opened the file. I had work to do and no time to waste. The first week in the villa was a study in surreal isolation, a strange immersion in a world that felt both luxurious and intensely confining. I existed entirely within a self-imposed bubble of quiet luxury and laser-like mental focus. My world shrank down to the four walls of the library, the steady glow of the computer screen, and the ever-growing stack of files that Luca delivered each morning with grim efficiency. The files contained transcripts, audio recordings, and detailed surveillance reports. A relentless river of whispered secrets and cleverly coded language that I had to painstakingly decipher. The work itself was intellectually exhilarating, a brutal, high-stakes application of everything I had spent years diligently studying. I was no longer dealing with abstract historical case studies or detached theoretical models. I was now actively analyzing the very beating heart of a living, breathing criminal organization, and the patterns I uncovered were both fascinating and utterly terrifying. I identified a captain in Positano whose language showed unmistakable signs of escalating paranoia, his sentences becoming increasingly fragmented, his threats more erratic and unpredictable. I noted a lieutenant in Sorrento who had suddenly and inexplicably started using Sicilian slang in his communications, a possible indicator of unauthorized contact with a rival syndicate, a dangerous breach of protocol. I wrote my reports with clinical precision, meticulously laying out my evidence, citing specific linguistic markers, and offering probabilities rather than definitive certainties. Valerio himself remained a ghost in the villa, an almost spectral presence. I sometimes heard his footsteps passing in the hallway, the low, indistinct murmur of his voice in another room, but he deliberately did not disturb me. My completed reports were sent to him electronically through the isolated system, and I received absolutely no feedback in return. It was like shouting into a void, my efforts seemingly swallowed by the silence. The only human interaction I had was with the silent, elderly butler who brought my meals with unwavering punctuality, and with Luca, who was effectively my warden, my constant minder. He was a man of few words, his very presence a constant, grim reminder of the inherent reality of my precarious situation. I tried to engage him once, naively asking about a particular phrase I had found in a transcript that I couldn't quite decipher. He simply looked at me with his flat, cold eyes, utterly devoid of any emotion, and said, "I break bones, Doressa. I don't parse words." It was a stark and brutal delineation of our respective roles. I was the brain, the analyst, the one who deciphered the secrets. He was the fist, the enforcer, the one who carried out the consequences. My only tenuous link to my old life was my personal phone, which I was surprisingly allowed to keep, although I had absolutely no doubt that it was constantly being monitored. I called my mother every day, a small ritual that kept me grounded. The change in her was nothing short of miraculous. The constant, wire-taught anxiety that had always been present in her voice was noticeably gone, replaced by a cautious, almost hesitant relief. "Alesia, it's incredible," she said one evening, her voice bubbling with an excitement I hadn't heard in years. "Your father, he's like a new man. That investment he made in the limoncello company, the one he always said was a fool's errand. It's suddenly taken off. A distributor from Milan came and offered us a huge contract. And the men who used to call, they've stopped calling. It's like a nightmare has finally ended." I closed my eyes, leaning back in the expensive leather chair, the weight of her words settling heavily on my shoulders. "I'm glad, Mama. I'm so glad. This grant of yours, it's a miracle. You must be working so hard, Cara. Are you eating properly? Are you getting enough sleep?" "I'm fine, Mama," I said, the carefully constructed lie tasting bitter on my tongue. "The research is demanding, but it's exactly what I wanted. It's intellectually stimulating." I was protecting them by consciously lying, carefully constructing a false narrative of a normal, productive life. But with each lie I told, I felt myself drifting further and further away from the person I used to be. The woman who had always valued truth above all else was now actively constructing a fortress of falsehoods, a necessary shield against the harsh realities of my new existence. It was on the 8th night that everything shifted yet again, the subtle tectonic plates of my world realigning in unexpected ways. I was working late, obsessively chasing a subtle linguistic thread in a seemingly innocuous series of text messages exchanged between two boat captains. The specific use of the word delfino, dolphin, was particularly inconsistent and troubling. Sometimes it seemed to refer to a person, a contact of some kind. Other times it appeared to be referring to a specific type of cargo, or perhaps even a shipment method. I was so deeply immersed in concentration that I didn't even hear the library door open behind me. "You are still working, Dr. Marino." Valerio's voice, coming from close behind me, made me jump, adrenaline surging through my veins. I spun my chair around to face him, instinctively defensive. He was standing there, having shed his usual impeccably tailored suit jacket and tie. His crisp white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and the sleeves were rolled casually up to his elbows, revealing the corded muscles of his forearms. He held 2 glasses filled with a deep ruby-red wine. He looked less like a don and more like a tired, yet still powerful businessman at the end of a long and arduous day. The transformation was strangely disarming. "The Delfino reference," I said, my heart still thumping from the surprise of his sudden appearance. "It's ambiguous. I'm trying to isolate the contextual rules governing its usage, but it's proving difficult." He handed me one of the glasses of wine, his touch lingering for a fraction of a second. "It's a person," he stated matter-of-factly, ignoring my professional embarrassment. "A young, fast swimmer who brings small, high-value packages from the larger ships to the shore. The inconsistency is deliberate, keeps the authorities guessing, makes it harder for them to track." Of course, it was so obvious now that he had said it, the answer staring me in the face all along. I felt a sudden flush of professional embarrassment. I should have been able to deduce that myself. "You lack the context," he said, leaning casually against the edge of the desk, his proximity sending a fresh wave of awareness through me, a visceral response I couldn't control. He smelled of wine, of the cool night air, and of something else, something uniquely and undeniably him. Linguistics can only take you so far, Elysia. You need to understand the mechanics of the world you are analyzing. He took a slow sip of his wine, his dark eyes watching me intently over the rim of the glass, assessing my reaction. Your report on the Amalfi captains was accurate. The one in Positano was becoming a liability. He was dealt with. The words, dealt with, hung heavily in the air between us, pregnant with unspoken violence and grim consequences. Another man, another life irrevocably altered as a direct result of my analysis. I took a large swallow of the wine, needing something to steady my nerves. It was rich and complex, tasting of dark cherries and oak, a very expensive vintage. And the lieutenant using Sicilian slang? I asked, desperately needing to steer the conversation back to the strictly clinical, to regain some semblance of control. A mistress from Palermo. A personal indiscretion, not a professional one. For now. He swirled the wine thoughtfully in his glass. You see, Elysia, context is everything. We sat in silence for a moment. The only sound in the room, the soft, rhythmic ticking of the grand clock in the corner. The tension between us was palpable. A living thing, a thick, humming wire connecting us across the few feet of Persian rug that separated us. Why did you really bring me here, Don Valerio? The question left my lips before I could consciously stop it. A reckless act of defiance. He looked at me, his dark eyes unreadable, the depths of his thoughts hidden behind an impenetrable veil. Valerio, he said softly, ignoring my direct question. When we are alone in this room, you may call me Valerio. That was not an answer. It was a calculated concession, a deliberate act of intimacy. And it was far more dangerous than any direct answer could have been. You could have had me do this work from my apartment, Valerio. You could have remained at a safe distance, insulated from any direct contact. But you brought me here, into your home, into your world. Why? He set his glass down carefully on the desk with a soft click, the sound amplified in the silent room. He moved with that distinctive predator's grace, coming to stand directly in front of my chair, effectively trapping me. He didn't touch me, but his mere presence was a tangible, physical force, pressing down on me, stealing the air from my lungs. Because I wanted to see, he murmured, his gaze tracing the lines of my face, the curve of my throat, as if memorizing every detail. The woman with the nerve to stare me down in a public piazza, the mind sharp enough to dissect my entire organization from a handful of text messages. I wanted to see if she had a spine to match her intellect, or if she would break under the silence, under the isolation, under the crushing weight of what she was truly doing. His eyes met mine, and the intensity in his gaze was scorching, almost overwhelming. You have not broken, Elysia. You have thrived. A slow, almost predatory smile touched his lips, a dangerous expression I couldn't quite decipher. That is intriguing. My breath caught in my throat. The air in the room was so thick and charged that I could barely draw it into my lungs. Every survival instinct, every shred of self-preservation, screamed at me to look away, to retreat, to put as much distance between us as possible. But I couldn't. I was utterly and completely mesmerized, caught in his web. And what happens when you are no longer intrigued, Valerio? I whispered, my voice barely audible. A slow, dark smile touched his lips again, sending a fresh shiver of apprehension down my spine. Then, Kara, you had better hope your debt is already paid in full. He reached out then, not to touch my face as I had unconsciously feared, but to pick up a pen from my desk. His fingers brushed lightly against mine as he did so, and the same electric jolt from that first night arced between us again, hotter and far more potent this time, leaving my skin tingling. He straightened up, breaking the intense moment. Finish your wine, Elysia, and get some sleep. The Delfino can wait until morning. He turned and walked deliberately out of the library, leaving me alone with the ghost of his lingering touch and the terrifying realization that the most dangerous threat in this gilded cage wasn't the pervasive violence or the endemic crime. It was the man himself, and the traitorous part of me that was increasingly, desperately drawn to him. I finished the remaining wine in one long, unsteady gulp, the rich liquid burning a path down my throat. The Delfino was completely forgotten. All I could think about was the unsettling look in his eyes when he had called me intriguing, a label far more perilous than any declaration of enmity. I was in far deeper trouble than I had ever imagined, drowning in a sea of my own making. The days began to develop a new, subtly more dangerous rhythm, a pattern that was both seductive and deeply unsettling. The work itself remained largely unchanged, a constant, unrelenting stream of complex analysis that sharpened my mind to a razor's edge. But now, Valerio's evening visits to the library became an almost ritualistic occurrence. He would invariably appear in the library, often bearing a bottle of expensive wine or a glass of rich Amaro, and he would debrief me on the day's findings. It was no longer simply a one-way stream of information flowing from me to him. He would now actively question my conclusions, deliberately challenge my underlying assumptions, and provide the brutal, real-world context that my purely academic analysis inevitably lacked. He was, in his own terrifying way, actively mentoring me, shaping me into something new. He taught me about the delicate, precarious balance of fear and respect that held his entire world together. He explained the subtle yet critical differences between the camera's chaotic and often short-sighted ambition and the Andrangheta's silent, almost blood-deep loyalties that stretched back generations. He discussed the intricate politics of the port, noting how a seemingly minor delayed shipping container could be interpreted as either a deliberate and calculated insult or the ominous prelude to an all-out war. I listened intently, absorbing it all, my detached academic understanding of organized crime being ruthlessly overwritten by the lived experience of the man who commanded it, the man who lived and breathed it every single day. And through it all, the electric current between us grew palpably stronger, a constant low-voltage hum that made the very air in the library crackle with unspoken tension. We circled each other warily, two predators from entirely different species, both fascinated and acutely wary of the power the other wielded. I learned to read the subtle shifts in his usually impassive face, the slight tightening around his eyes when he was displeased with my progress, the almost imperceptible relaxation of his jaw when he was genuinely impressed by my insights. He, in turn, seemed to be learning from me as well, developing a keen awareness of my own rhythms and limitations. He knew instinctively when I was stuck on a particularly thorny problem, when I needed absolute silence to focus, and when I desperately needed him to provide the missing piece of context that would make everything suddenly click into place, revealing the hidden patterns beneath the surface. It was during one of these intense evening sessions, roughly 2 weeks after his first unscheduled visit to the library, that I stumbled, exposing a vulnerability I hadn't even realized existed. I was meticulously analyzing a series of seemingly routine phone calls from a captain stationed in Forcella, a dense, ancient neighborhood nestled in the very heart of Naples. The man's language was a veritable masterclass in evasion and deliberate double meaning, a tangled web of veiled threats and coded messages. I had been at it for hours, poring over the transcripts, and my focus was beginning to fray, the edges blurring. Valerio was standing silently by the window, his back to me, looking out over the sprawling cityscape. I was trying to explain a particularly convoluted metaphor involving a rotten fish and a wedding, my frustration steadily mounting. "It doesn't make any sense," I said, pushing my hair back from my forehead with a sigh of exasperation. "The semantic field is all wrong. He's clearly talking about a celebration of some kind, but he's simultaneously using the lexicon of decay and poison. It's cognitively dissonant, a complete clash of ideas." Valerio didn't turn from the window, his posture unchanging. "He's telling his contact that the deal is off. The product has been contaminated, and the entire partnership is poisoned. The wedding was the proposed merger between their operations. The fish is the product itself. He's simply being poetic." The stark simplicity of his explanation, coming after hours of my own convoluted mental gymnastics, was almost the final straw. A wave of overwhelming exhaustion and a profound sense of futility washed over me. I was, in the end, just an outsider, naively playing a dangerous game with rules I could only ever hope to half understand. In a moment of pure, unthinking frustration, I cursed under my breath, a low, muttered expletive. But I didn't curse in Italian, the language I had been immersed in for weeks. The words that instinctively slipped out were in the old, guttural Sicilian dialect that my nonna had spoken so fluently when I was a child, a language I had almost forgotten. Words she had always used when she was deeply angry at the world, when she felt betrayed or helpless. Sharp, ancient words that were steeped in the very soil of the island, and unapologetically foul. The room went utterly still, the silence suddenly absolute. The very air itself seemed to freeze, the temperature dropping several degrees in an instant. Valerio turned slowly from the window with a deliberate, measured motion that was far more threatening than any sudden movement could ever have been. His expression was completely unreadable, an impenetrable mask of composure, but his eyes were burning with a dark, intense fire I had never witnessed before, a palpable rage simmering just beneath the surface. He crossed the room in a few silent strides, his movements fluid and predatory, stopping directly in front of my chair. He loomed over me, his imposing presence blocking out the light, filling my entire world. The scent of him, clean and sharp and utterly intoxicating, invaded my senses, overwhelming my ability to think clearly. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs, a frantic bird caught hopelessly in a trap. I had overstepped. I had been undeniably disrespectful, breaking an unspoken rule. I had inadvertently shown a side of myself that was far too raw, far too vulnerable. I kept myself hidden, knowing that in his world, any sign of vulnerability was a weakness just waiting to be exploited. I braced myself, preparing for his anger, the cold dismissal, the pointed reminder of my place. But it never came. Instead, he leaned down, placing his hands on the arms of my chair, effectively caging me in. His face was mere inches from mine, his gaze laser-focused on my lips. "Say that again," he commanded, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that sent shivers through my entire body. It wasn't a question. It was an absolute demand, delivered slowly and deliberately. The request was so unexpected, so shockingly intimate, that it stole the air right out of my lungs. This wasn't about a reprimand. This was about something else entirely, something far more complex and dangerous. The tension between us, the humming wire that had been stretching tighter and tighter for weeks, suddenly snapped with the force of a lightning strike. The air in the room was thick with a palpable, intoxicating heat. I could feel the almost unbearable warmth radiating from his skin, see the dark flecks of desire burning in his obsidian eyes. My mind went utterly blank. All my carefully honed training, all my ingrained fear, was wiped away completely by the sheer, magnetic force of his presence. My lips parted slightly, involuntarily. I could barely breathe, let alone form coherent words. But I did it anyway. I repeated the curse, those old, ugly Sicilian words, speaking them slowly, deliberately, each syllable dripping with intention. My voice was a husky whisper, each word a deliberate caress in the charged space crackling between us. I saw his eyes darken, the pupils expanding until they nearly swallowed the irises entirely. A muscle ticked fiercely in his jaw, the controlled mask he always wore suddenly shattering, and for the very first time, I caught a glimpse of the raw, untamed man lurking beneath the surface. A man consumed by passion, fire, and a ruthless, all-consuming desire. He didn't move for what felt like an eternity, just held my gaze, letting the ancient words hang in the air, allowing the full weight and meaning of this profound shift to settle over both of us like a heavy blanket. The pretense of employer and employee, of captor and captive, simply evaporated, leaving nothing but the raw, unfiltered truth of the moment. This was something primal, something inevitable. "Do you have any idea?" he murmured, his voice rough with a restraint that was clearly costing him a great deal. "What it does to a man like me, to hear a beautiful, intelligent woman curse in the tongue of his ancestors." He brought one hand up, his fingers hovering just beside my cheek, not quite touching, but close enough that I could feel the almost unbearable heat of his skin. It is the most provocative thing I have ever heard. Then he closed that final, infinitesimal distance between us. His lips met mine in a kiss that was anything but gentle. It was a claim, a conquest, a declaration of war. It was pure heat and pressure and a desperate, ravenous need that mirrored the one that was suddenly roaring to life inside me, threatening to consume me whole. It was the intoxicating taste of expensive wine and dark secrets and pure, undiluted power. Every single warning bell in my head was instantly silenced by the sheer, undeniable rightness of it, by the feeling of a lock finally clicking open after a lifetime of being the wrong key. My hands came up, not to push him away as I should have, but to clutch desperately at the front of his shirt, holding on for dear life as the world tilted precariously on its axis. He deepened the kiss, one hand tangling possessively in my hair, the other moving to my waist, pulling me up from the chair and pressing me against the solid, unyielding wall of his body. I was lost, utterly and completely lost. I was found, finally, irrevocably found. I was in more danger than I had ever been in my entire life. And I never, ever wanted it to end. When he finally broke the kiss, we were both breathing raggedly, our lungs screaming for air. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed, his body tense and vibrating against me. "Elysia," he breathed, my name a prayer and a curse mingling on his lips. It was the only word either of us could manage to utter in that moment. The world outside this room, the world of debts and murders and moral compromises, simply ceased to exist. There was only this. There was only him. The world snapped jarringly back into sharp focus with the distinct sound of the library door clicking shut. He was gone, vanished into thin air. But the air still vibrated with the lingering echo of his presence. The ghost of his touch seared into my lips, branding them with a memory I knew would never fade. I stood there alone in the vast, silent room, my fingers pressed to my tingling mouth. I could still taste him. Dark, rich, and profoundly dangerous. My heart was a wild, frantic thing, desperately trying to beat its way out of my chest. What had I done? I had crossed a line, a point of no return. I had kissed the devil himself, and a part of me, a treacherous, hidden part, had reveled in it. The clinical part of my brain, the one that had been meticulously trained to analyze and deconstruct, was screaming in deafening alarm. This was a catastrophic miscalculation of epic proportions. I had blurred the already dangerously skewed lines of a professional relationship that was built on a massive power imbalance. I had allowed my own personal, traitorous attraction to override every single shred of self-preservation I possessed. He was a man who casually ordered executions. I was a woman he effectively owned. This couldn't possibly end well. But the rest of me, the part that had felt so incredibly alive and truly seen in his arms, was singing a defiant, reckless song. That kiss had not been solely about power or domination. Not entirely, at least. It had also been about recognition, about seeing something deeper. It was as if he had somehow seen past the desperate daughter, the useful academic, and had kissed the raw, real woman underneath. The one who was utterly tired of always being good. The one who was secretly fascinated by the darkness. The one who could curse fluently in Sicilian when pushed to her absolute limit. I stumbled over to the window, kneading the cool glass against my burning forehead, desperate for some kind of grounding. The city lights spread out below me were a blurred, indistinct tapestry. My life had just fractured irrevocably into a distinct before and after. Before the kiss, I was simply his prisoner, his asset, a pawn in his game. After the kiss, what was I now? His lover? His mistress? Just another possession, albeit a more intimate one. The thought should have filled me with dread, with a paralyzing fear. Instead, a treacherous thrill shot through me, igniting a dangerous spark of anticipation. I didn't see him at all the next day. Luca brought my files in the morning, his expression as unreadable and impassive as ever. He did not indicate in any way that he knew his boss had pinned me to a chair and kissed me senseless the night before. The work was my only anchor, the only solid thing I could cling to in the storm raging inside me. I threw myself into it with a desperate intensity, using the complex patterns of deceit and loyalty as a lifeline to keep my own swirling, tumultuous emotions at bay. I meticulously analyzed a proposed deal with a Russian consortium, identifying subtle linguistic markers of deception hidden within their counterproposals. I profiled a new city councilman, uncovering subtle signs of an existing allegiance to a rival family. The work was sharp, clean, and utterly logical, a stark contrast to the chaos consuming me. It was a sanctuary, a temporary escape from the illogical storm that had broken inside me. But my concentration was a fragile, easily shattered thing. Every single sound in the hallway made my heart leap erratically in my chest. Every time the door creaked open, I instinctively expected it to be him. But it was only the butler bringing lunch or Luca with yet more files. The absence itself was a presence, a heavy, suffocating weight that filled the room. It felt deliberate, a calculated move on his part. A punishment, perhaps? A test? Or was he, too, grappling with the far-reaching consequences of what we had done, struggling to regain his own equilibrium? The uncertainty was a special kind of exquisite torture, a slow, agonizing burn. That evening, I found that I simply couldn't focus, no matter how hard I tried. The words on the screen swam before my eyes, blurring into meaningless shapes. I paced restlessly around the library, my skin feeling too tight, my nerves stretched to the breaking point. I felt like an addict desperately waiting for a fix, and the drug was the dangerous, captivating presence of Valerio Rossi. Finally, as the grandfather clock in the corner chimed 10, the door swung open. He stood there framed in the doorway, a dark and imposing figure. He was dressed much as he had been the night before, but his expression was subtly different. The raw, almost feral hunger that had been so evident was gone, replaced by a watchful, intense stillness that seemed to radiate from him. He held 2 glasses, but this time they contained an amber liquid, not wine. Whiskey. He closed the door softly behind him and walked deliberately toward me, his steps silent on the plush rug. He held out one of the glasses. I took it, our fingers brushing lightly in the exchange. The brief contact was electric, a stark and undeniable reminder of the line we had irrevocably crossed. "You've been quiet today," he said, his voice low and carefully controlled. "Your report on the Russians was thorough. You saved me from a very costly mistake." It was praise, yes, but it also felt like a probe, a subtle attempt to gauge the fallout from our encounter. He was assessing the damage, trying to determine what had changed between us. "It's my job," I said, my voice coming out far steadier than I expected it to. I took a small sip of the whiskey. It was smooth and smoky, burning a welcome path of warmth down my throat. "Is it?" He moved to his usual spot, leaning casually against the edge of the desk. But he didn't sit. He remained standing, watching me intently, dominating the space without even trying to. It was clear he was addressing the uncertain state of our professional dynamic after the previous night. Of course, he was a man who confronted problems directly, head-on. It was one of the things that made him so incredibly effective, and simultaneously so terrifying. "I'm not sure either," I admitted, deciding that honesty was the only viable currency I had to offer. "Now, I'm not in the habit of kissing my employees." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a fleeting expression that barely registered. "And I am not in the habit of wanting to kiss them." The admission, so blunt and utterly unexpected, stole my breath away once again. He took a deliberate step closer, closing the distance between us. "It complicates things. You told me nothing in your world is simple," I countered, holding my ground, refusing to back down. "You thrive on complexity." "I do," he agreed, his gaze fixed on mine, intense and unwavering. "But this is a complexity I did not anticipate. You are a variable I did not account for, Elysia, from the very beginning." He reached out and gently took the whiskey glass from my hand, setting both of our glasses carefully on the desk. Then he took my hands in his. His palms were warm and slightly calloused, his grip firm but not painful. The gesture was astonishingly intimate, a silent declaration of intent. I brought you here because you were useful. I kept you here because you were fascinating. But last night, he shook his head almost imperceptibly, a rare display of genuine, uncalculated emotion flickering across his face. Last night, you became a necessity. The word landed squarely in the center of my chest, a detonation of raw feeling that resonated through my entire being. A necessity. It was more powerful than valuable, more profound than simply desired. It was a confession of dependency from a man who outwardly depended on no one, a crack in his carefully constructed armor. I don't know what that means, I whispered, my heart pounding wildly in my throat. It means I cannot let you go, he said, his voice suddenly rough with a sincerity that cut through all pretense. It means the thought of you leaving this villa, of you being anywhere but where I can see you, where I can touch you, is unacceptable. He lifted my hand, turning it over and pressing a searing kiss to my open palm. The touch was like a brand, a mark of possession that went far deeper than any contract or agreement. It means the debt is forgiven. All of it. You are no longer an employee. You are here because I want you here, because I need you here. He was setting me ostensibly free, only to bind me to him with infinitely stronger chains. Chains forged of desire, of connection, of a terrifying mutual need that neither of us could deny. It was the most seductive prison I could ever possibly imagine. A gilded cage built of shared secrets and unspoken promises. And what am I, if I'm not your employee? I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. He cupped my face gently in his hands, his thumb stroking softly across my cheek. You are mine, he said. The words not a threat, but a solemn vow, a declaration of ownership that resonated deep within my soul. And I am yours if you will have me. The undisguised surrender in his voice, the vulnerability flickering in his normally impenetrable eyes, was my undoing. This powerful, dangerous man was offering me not just his body, but a piece of his carefully guarded soul, a trust he extended to almost no one. I saw the truth of it then, with a clarity that stunned me. This was not a game. This was not a calculated manipulation. This was real, terrifyingly, beautifully real. I rose up on my toes and kissed him. It was my answer, the only one I could give. It was my surrender, my acceptance of the chains he offered. It was my choice made freely and with open eyes. This time, the kiss was different, a world apart from the urgent, demanding hunger of the previous night. It was slower, deeper, an exploration and a confirmation of something profound that had ignited between us. It was a promise whispered on our lips, a silent vow exchanged in the darkness. When we finally broke apart, his forehead rested against mine, our breaths mingling in the air between us. From now on, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion, this is your home. I am your home. And in that moment, surrounded by the silent, watchful books in the heart of the lion's den, I believed him, completely and without reservation. The world slowly remade itself in the days that followed, shifting and solidifying around this new reality. The library was no longer simply my office, a place of obligation and constraint. It became our sanctuary, a shared space filled with whispered secrets and stolen moments. The villa was no longer my gilded cage, a symbol of my captivity. It became my domain, the boundaries of my world expanding to encompass its vast and opulent spaces. Valerio was no longer just my captor or my employer, a figure of fear and control. He became my lover, and in his own fiercely possessive way, my partner, an equal in this strange, dangerous game we were playing. He moved me out of the guest suite and into his own rooms, a sprawling complex of spaces that felt intrinsically like him. Sparse, elegant, and dominated by a wall of windows that looked out over the breathtaking expanse of the bay. Our days settled into a new, intoxicating rhythm, a delicate dance of power and vulnerability. I would still work, but the constant pressure was gone, the weight of the debt lifted from my shoulders. I worked now because I was genuinely fascinated by it, because I was good at it, and because it also provided a way to remain close to him, to understand the complex and dangerous world he moved in. He would often pull up a chair beside me at the desk, casually reading over my shoulder, his arm draped around the back of my chair, his fingers playing absently with the ends of my hair. He valued my mind, sought my opinion, and listened intently to my analyses with a focused attention that was more flattering than any praise he could have offered. In the evenings, we would have dinner out on the terrace. The city spread out below us like a glittering carpet of diamonds. He told me stories of his childhood, of a stern, unyielding father who had taught him that emotion was a liability, of a mother who had filled their cold, stone house with music and laughter until her untimely death cast a permanent shadow over everything. He spoke of the immense weight of his inheritance, not just of wealth, but of power, and the constant, grinding vigilance it required to maintain it. I, in turn, told him about my life before, the safe, predictable academic world I had inhabited, my mother's quiet strength, my father's fatal flaw of optimism. I told him about my Nana, the fiery woman who had taught me the old Sicilian curses, a woman who had defied her own family to marry for love. "She would have liked you," I said one night, the stars sharp and brilliant above us. "She appreciated men with spines." Valerio smiled, a real, unguarded smile that transformed his face, making him look younger, lighter, almost carefree. "And what would she have thought of you being with a man like me?" I looked at him, at the sharp, beautiful lines of his face illuminated in the flickering candlelight, at the palpable power that radiated from him even in repose. "She would have told me to be careful," I said honestly. "And then she would have told me to live my life without regret." He reached across the table, his hand covering mine, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through me. "I will spend my life ensuring you have none." The words were a vow, spoken with an intensity that resonated deep within my soul. But this new life wasn't all softness and starlight, stolen kisses and whispered confessions. The harsh reality of his world was a constant, dark undertow, a persistent threat lurking just beneath the surface. There were late-night phone calls that would pull him abruptly from our bed, his voice turning cold and hard as he issued curt commands in another room, the details of which remained shrouded in secrecy. There were times when Luca would arrive unexpectedly, his face grim and tight, and they would disappear into his study for hours, emerging with a palpable tension in their shoulders that spoke volumes about violence dealt or violence ordered. I never asked for specifics, never pried into his affairs. He never offered them, never volunteered information that I didn't need to know. It was an unspoken agreement, a carefully drawn line that we both respected. He protected me from the worst of it, sheltering me from the brutal realities of his world. And I, in turn, accepted the parts that I needed to know, the necessary evils that came with being his advisor. I was his confidant, his strategist, but never his confessor. One afternoon, about a month after I had moved into his rooms, I was in the library, meticulously profiling a new contact from Bari. Something about the man's linguistic patterns felt subtly off, a dissonance that I couldn't quite put my finger on. He was too smooth, too consistent, too polished. In real human communication, there are always tiny inconsistencies, hesitations, verbal stumbles, the subtle fingerprints of a thinking, feeling mind. This man's language was sterile, almost robotic, as if it had been carefully rehearsed or generated by an algorithm. I was so completely engrossed in my analysis that I didn't even hear Valerio come in. I only felt his hands on my shoulders, his thumbs kneading the tight muscles in my neck, and I instinctively leaned back into his touch with a contented sigh. "You're tense?" he murmured, leaning down to press a soft kiss to the top of my head. "This man from Bari," I said, gesturing to the screen with a wave of my hand. "He's a lie." Valerio stilled instantly, his body going rigid. "Explain." "His language is too perfect," I said, my fingers flying across the keyboard as I pulled up more data. "The sentence structures are mathematically balanced. The emotional valence is flat, regardless of the topic he's addressing. He uses no regional dialect, no personal idioms. He's either a highly disciplined sociopath, which is certainly possible." I paused and turned slightly in my chair to look up at him. "Or he's a construct, a persona deliberately built for this specific interaction. I think he's a plant, probably from the DIA, the Divisione Investigativa Antimafia, Italy's elite anti-mafia police. Valerio's face went cold and utterly smooth, the mask of the Don settling back firmly into place. He studied the profile on the screen intently, then looked back at me, a new and almost fierce respect burning in his eyes. "You are sure?" "As sure as I can be without hearing his voice," I said. "But the linguistic evidence is incredibly compelling. He's a ghost, a phantom designed to deceive." He pulled out his phone and typed a rapid one-word message. "Abort." Then he crouched down beside my chair, taking my hands in his. His hands were warm, solid, undeniably real. "You just saved me from a very long, very unpleasant conversation with a government prosecutor," he said, his voice low and intense. "They were getting clever. They've never tried using a linguist before." He brought my hand to his lips and kissed my knuckles, his gaze holding mine with an almost unnerving intensity. "You are my most valuable weapon, Elysia. My secret." The word weapon should have chilled me, should have sent a shiver of fear down my spine. But the way he said it, with such reverence and possessive pride, it felt almost like a caress, a dark and dangerous compliment. I was not simply a tool to be used and discarded. I was a sword he trusted implicitly to guard his back, a shield against his enemies. It was a dark honor, to be sure, but an honor nonetheless. That night, he showed me a different side of his gratitude, a visceral expression of his appreciation that went far beyond mere words. It was not in words, but in touch, in the language of the body. He worshipped my body with a focused intensity that left me breathless and boneless, mapping every curve and hollow as if he were committing me to memory, memorizing every inch of my skin. He was a man who always took what he wanted, but with me he gave as much as he took, pushing me to the very edge of sanity and holding me there, suspended in a state of exquisite torment, until I was sobbing his name, until the only world that existed was the one we made together in the darkness, a world of pure sensation and raw emotion. Afterward, as we lay tangled together in the sheets, the moonlight casting silver stripes across the bed, he spoke softly into the silence. "I have to go to Palermo tomorrow. There is a meeting, a gathering of the old families." His voice was casual, almost conversational, but I could feel the underlying tension in his body, the barely suppressed energy that hinted at the gravity of the situation. This was significant, a pivotal moment in the power dynamics of his world. "How long will you be gone?" 3 days. No more." He turned onto his side, propping his head up on his hand, his dark eyes suddenly serious and searching. "You will be safe here. Luca and a dozen other men will be with you at all times. You will not leave the villa." It was an order, delivered with absolute authority, but it was also wrapped in a layer of genuine concern that warmed me from the inside out. "I understand," I said softly, reassuring him. He reached out and traced the line of my jaw with a gentle finger, his touch sending a shiver of pleasure through me. "When I return, things will be different. This meeting, it is about the future. Our future." He didn't elaborate further, but he didn't need to. I understood perfectly what he was saying. He was solidifying his power, securing his position at the head of the table, and by extension, securing mine as well. He was building a fortress around us, a safe haven in a dangerous world, and he was going to Palermo to lay the final stones, to ensure that our future together would be unassailable. The morning he left, he kissed me goodbye in the grand foyer, a hard, possessive kiss that was deliberately performed in front of Luca and the other men. It was a public declaration, a clear message to anyone who might dare to question my place in his life. 3 days. He whispered against my lips, his voice low and urgent. "Wait for me." I watched the sleek black SUVs disappear down the cypress-lined drive, a strange emptiness opening up inside me, a void that mirrored the vastness of the villa itself. The villa, which had felt so vibrantly alive with his presence, was suddenly just a beautiful empty shell, a gilded cage that felt more confining than ever before. I was the queen of a silent castle, waiting anxiously for her king to return from war, wondering what the future held. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I would wait for him forever, if that was what it took. The first day without him was unnervingly quiet, almost eerily so. The villa, usually a hive of subdued activity, felt more like a tomb, hushed and still. I tried to work, pulling up files on the minor players in the Amalfi Coast operation, but my focus was completely shattered, fragmented into a million pieces. The words on the screen blurred into meaningless shapes, refusing to coalesce into any coherent thought. My mind kept drifting back to the intensity in Valerio's eyes when he had said, "When I return, things will be different." The promise hanging in those words was both thrilling and deeply terrifying. Different how? What did a man like him consider a future? A permanent place by his side as his consort, his queen? A life lived forever within these walls, surrounded by luxury and power, but ultimately confined to the dimensions of his empire? The part of me that was still Dr. Elysia Marino, the fiercely independent academic who valued her freedom above all else, recoiled instinctively at the very thought of such a gilded cage. But the woman he had unearthed, the one who thrived on danger and craved his touch, found the idea undeniably seductive, a tantalizing prospect that both frightened and thrilled her. On the second day, the unnerving silence began to grate on my nerves, becoming almost unbearable. I took a book out to the meticulously manicured garden, trying desperately to lose myself in a fictional world, but the story felt pale and insubstantial compared to the one I was living, the high-stakes drama unfolding around me. Luca remained a constant, silent shadow, always within sight but never intruding, his presence a subtle reminder of the precariousness of my situation. I was safe, yes, but I was also a prize, a valuable asset, and therefore a potential vulnerability for the man who protected me. That evening, my phone buzzed insistently, breaking the oppressive silence. It was my mother, calling from what felt like a million miles away. The sound of her voice, so normal, so concerned, was a jarring intrusion from a life that seemed almost dreamlike in its distance. "Elysia, honey, how is the research going? You've been so quiet lately. We haven't heard from you in weeks." "It's intense, Mama," I said, forcing a lightness into my voice that I certainly didn't feel. "I'm making a lot of progress, though. It's just very absorbing. Your father and I were thinking of coming down to Naples this weekend. We haven't seen you in so long. We could stay in a hotel, take you to dinner, catch up." Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through me like a shard of ice. The very thought of my sweet, naive parents anywhere near this villa, anywhere near this dangerous world, was utterly unbearable. They could not see me here, surrounded by armed men, living in the opulent home of a mafia boss. They could not see the profound change that had taken place within me, the subtle shift in my demeanor, the new sharpness in my eyes, the way I had so easily acclimated to a life of luxury and latent violence. "No," I said too quickly, the word tumbling out before I could stop it. I quickly softened my tone, forcing myself to sound more reasonable. "I mean, not this weekend. I'm actually going to be in Rome for a few days. A last-minute research symposium. Very exclusive. I won't be back until sometime next week." The lies came so easily now, sliding off my tongue with an almost practiced ease. Each one another brick in the wall that was steadily separating my two lives, building an insurmountable barrier between them. "Oh," she said, the disappointment clear in her voice, despite her attempts to hide it. "Well, another time then. We miss you terribly, darling." "I miss you too, Mama," I said, and that at least was the unvarnished truth. A profound wave of loneliness washed over me after I hung up the phone, leaving me feeling adrift and disconnected. I was lying to everyone I loved, deceiving the very people who knew me best. I had become a stranger to them, an unfamiliar figure shrouded in secrets, and the person I was rapidly becoming was someone I was only just beginning to know, someone I wasn't sure I even liked. I was adrift between two worlds, belonging fully to neither, a ghost haunting the edges of both. The third day dawned gray and oppressive, the sky a heavy sheet of lead pressing down on the city. A storm was brewing ominously out over the sea, the dark clouds gathering on the horizon. The air in the villa was thick and heavy, charged with an almost palpable tension that perfectly mirrored my own increasingly volatile mood. Valerio was due back today, and the anticipation had grown into a physical ache, a knot of longing that tightened in my chest with every passing hour. I found myself constantly listening for the telltale sound of tires crunching on the gravel drive, my heart leaping erratically at every creak of the ancient house, every rustle of wind through the cypress trees. The old house felt oppressive. Hours oozed by. I couldn't lose myself in a book. Work was impossible. I paced back and forth in the library, the minutes ticking by, each one amplifying my unease. The storm finally unleashed its fury late in the afternoon. Rain slammed against the windows, and jagged lightning ripped across the sky. The following thunder rattled the entire villa, shaking it to its core. It was amidst this pandemonium that Luca's phone buzzed. He listened intently, his face a mask of stone. He didn't utter a word, but his eyes locked with mine from across the room, conveying a clear, chilling message. Something terrible had happened. "What is it?" I asked, my voice strained. "The meeting in Palmo," he said, his voice a low growl that struggled to be heard above the roaring thunder. "There was an incident. An attempt, perhaps?" My blood turned to ice. "An attempt on his life?" Luca gave a short, sharp nod. "He's alive, unharmed. But there was betrayal from within our own ranks." The world seemed to shift on its axis. The air in the room suddenly felt thin, suffocating. An attempt, a betrayal. The words echoed in the brief silences between thunderclaps. All the theoretical dangers of Valerio's world had suddenly become terrifyingly, devastatingly real. "Where is he?" "He's returning. He'll be here within the hour." The next hour was the longest I had ever experienced. I stood at the window in the grand foyer, watching the storm rage, the driving rain blurring my view of the driveway. Every shadow, every sway of the trees in the wind made my heart skip a beat. The image of Valerio, surrounded by enemies, facing death, was seared into my mind. Finally, through the sheets of rain, headlights sliced through the gloom. Not one, but 3 SUVs sped up the driveway. They screeched to a halt at the entrance. The doors burst open. Men poured out, their bodies tense, weapons visible beneath their coats. And then he emerged from the lead vehicle. Valerio. He was alive. He was unharmed physically, but he was transformed. The composed, refined man who had left 3 days ago was gone. In his place stood a raw, primal force. His clothes were drenched, his hair plastered to his forehead, and his eyes blazed with a cold, murderous fury that was far more terrifying than any explosive anger. He strode into the foyer, water streaming from his coat and pooling on the marble floor. He ignored Luca, ignored the other men. His gaze, sharp as shattered glass, found me instantly. He crossed the space between us in a few powerful strides, his presence sucking all the oxygen from the room. He didn't say a word. He gripped my face in his hands, almost painfully, and kissed me. It was nothing like the kisses we had shared before. This was not about passion or tenderness. This was a branding, a desperate, furious reaffirmation of life. It was harsh and possessive, a storm of relief and rage. I could taste the rain on his lips, the metallic tang of adrenaline, the dark promise of vengeance. When he finally broke the kiss, he rested his forehead against mine, his breathing heavy and ragged. "They tried to take me from you," he growled, his voice raw with a barely contained violence that shook me to my core. "They will learn what it means to touch what is mine." In that instant, any remaining shreds of doubt or fear vanished. The academic, the daughter, the good girl, they all ceased to exist. I looked into the eyes of this dangerous, furious man, and I saw only my future. I placed my hand against his wet cheek. "Then we will teach them," I said, my voice steady, my own resolve hardening like diamond. His eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing his face, followed by a profound, dark satisfaction. He hadn't just come home to safety. He had come home to an ally. The storm of his return settled into a cold, focused calm. He shed his soaked coat, and the fury that had radiated from him upon arrival was now channeled, contained into something far more dangerous, a meticulous surgical intent. He led me not to the library or our bedroom, but to his war room, a place I had never been. A stark, modern space hidden behind a panel in his study. There were no books or frescoes in this room. Instead, monitors displayed live feeds from cameras I never knew existed. A large digital map of southern Italy was on display, covered in blinking lights, as well as a long, polished table. This was the brain of his operation, the nerve center. Luca and 2 other senior captains, men with grim faces and cold eyes, followed us in. Valerio stood at the head of the table, placing his hands flat on the surface. "The traitor was Salvatore Rossi," he said, his voice clipped and devoid of emotion. "My cousin." The name meant nothing to me, but the reaction from the other men was palpable. A subtle tightening of jaws, a collective intake of breath. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a sacrilege. He made a deal with the Lombardo family from Palermo. They provided the shooters, he provided the access. His reward was to be my territory north of Salerno. He looked at me, including me in this council of war. His mistake was overestimating their competence and underestimating my paranoia. He tapped a key on the table, and a photograph appeared on the main screen. A handsome man with a familiar, arrogant tilt to his chin and the same dark Rossi eyes. Salvatore is on the run. He knows he has one chance. He won't surface again in Italy. Valerio's eyes were like chips of obsidian. But he has a weakness. A daughter. A 7-year-old girl living with her mother in a private school in Switzerland. He believes they are hidden. He is wrong. A cold dread trickled down my spine. I knew where this was heading. This was the world I had chosen. This was the price of the power, the protection, the passion. Valerio's gaze swept over his men. "We will find him through the child, but we will not touch the child. Is that understood?" The men nodded. The distinction was crucial. This was about sending a message, not about slaughtering innocents. It was a line that even his brand of brutality would not cross. Then his eyes settled on me. "Alicia, Salvatore is clever. He'll be using cutouts and encrypted channels, but he'll need to communicate. He'll need to know his daughter is safe. I need you to find him. Listen to the wind. Find the anomaly in the patterns. He is a man under immense stress. He will make a mistake. I want you to find it." He wasn't asking the men to track him through brute force alone. He was asking me to hunt him with my mind. He was handing me the scent and trusting me to run with the hounds. It was the ultimate test of my loyalty, my skill, and my stomach for this life. I looked at the face of Salvatore Rossi on the screen. I saw the arrogance, the familial resemblance, the betrayal. I thought of the gunman in Palermo, the bullets that had tried to tear Valerio from this world, from me, and I felt a cold, clear rage of my own. "Give me everything you have on him," I said, my voice steady. "Every intercepted communication from the last year, his financial records, his known associates, his travel patterns. And I need a voice sample." A slow, approving smile touched Valerio's lips. It was the smile of a wolf. "You have it." For the next 48 hours I lived in the war room. I slept in short, fitful bursts on a leather couch, ate meals brought to me, and completely immersed myself in the life of Salvatore Rossi. I learned his speech patterns, his favorite slang, the way he used humor to mask aggression, and the slight stutter he developed when lying under pressure. I built a psychological profile so detailed that I felt I could predict his every move. The key, as I had suspected, was the daughter. I found it in a series of seemingly innocuous comments he'd made to associates over the past 6 months, mentions of a little bird and her song. Cross-referencing these with travel data, I pinpointed a private school near Lake Geneva. Then I turned to the real-time intercepts. The chatter was a chaotic mess of coded language and dead ends. But I was looking for something specific. Not a command or a threat, but a thread of paternal anxiety. And I found it. A fragment of a conversation picked up from a tapped phone belonging to one of Salvatore's old drivers. The driver was talking to his own wife, complaining about a strange request. A man he didn't know had paid him to drive to a small town in the French Alps and leave a specific children's book, a French edition of Le Petit Prince, on a specific bench in a park at a specific time. It was a one-time drop, easy money. The driver assumed it was a romantic gesture, a lover's secret, but I knew the story of a lonely prince caring for his single perfect rose. A message to a little girl, a signal. I ran to Valerio's study, my heart pounding not with fear, but with the fierce thrill of the hunt. He was at his desk reviewing weapons manifests. I didn't speak. I placed the transcript on his desk and circled the relevant lines. He read it. His expression didn't change, but the air in the room shifted. He looked up at me, and the pride in his eyes was a physical warmth. "The park in Chamonix," he said softly. "He'll be watching." He wouldn't trust anyone else to confirm the drop was made. He stood and came around the desk to stand before me. He cupped my face, his thumb stroking my cheek. "You are magnificent," he whispered, and then he kissed me. A seal of approval and a promise. 2 days later, the news came. French authorities had apprehended Salvatore Rossi in a café overlooking the park in Chamonix. He had been quietly extradited to Italy and into the waiting hands of Valerio's men. There was no news report, no official record. He had ceased to exist. That night, Valerio took me to the very edge of the cliffs behind the villa, where the land dropped away to the churning sea far below. The storm had passed, and the sky was clear, ablaze with a billion stars. He stood behind me, his arms wrapped around me, his chin resting on my head. "It is done," he said, his voice quiet in the vast darkness. "The challenge has been met. The message has been sent." He turned me in his arms to face him. The moonlight sculpted his features in silver and shadow. "You stood with me. You didn't flinch. You hunted one of my own blood, and you found him." He went down on one knee. The world stopped. There on the cliff's edge, with the ancient sea roaring below and the infinite sky above, Valerio Rossi, the most powerful man in southern Italy, looked up at me, his obsidian eyes reflecting the starlight. He took my hand. "Alicia Marino," he said, his voice strong and clear, carrying over the wind. "You are the strength I didn't know I lacked. You are the mind that completes my own. You are the only woman who has ever looked at me and seen the man, not the monster." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It wasn't a gaudy diamond, but a deep blood-red ruby, square-cut and ancient, set in heavy, intricately worked gold. It looked like a crown. "This was my mother's," he said. "The women of my family have worn it for generations. They were all strong, but none, I think, as strong as you." He held the ring, his gaze locked with mine. "Marry me, rule with me, be my wife, be my queen." There were no more doubts, no more fears. The journey from the cafe to this cliff had been one of terror and transformation. And I had emerged on the other side, forged into something new, something harder, something that belonged utterly to this man and this world. I looked at the ring, at the man, at the future he was offering. A future of power, of passion, of a love that was as dangerous and profound as the sea below us. I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said, my voice steady, my heart full. He slid the ring onto my finger. It was heavy. It was perfect. He rose and kissed me, a seal, a vow, a beginning. We were no longer a man and his asset. We were a king and his queen, and together we would build an empire that would echo through the ages. The ruby was a constant, heavy warmth on my finger, a tangible anchor to the new reality that had been born on the cliff's edge. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a sigil. The morning after the proposal, I walked into the library and felt the shift in atmosphere. Luca, who had always regarded me with a neutral, professional distance, now gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod of his head. The butler, when he brought my coffee, addressed me as Signora Rossi for the first time. The change was subtle but absolute. I was no longer the guest, the consultant, the lover. I was the future. Valerio was different, too. The last vestiges of the wall he kept between his personal and professional lives had crumbled. He began to include me in everything. Later that day, he spread out a series of architectural plans across the large library table. They were for a new, state-of-the-art security and communications center to be built in a sublevel of the villa. "This will be your domain," he said, his finger tracing the outline of a soundproofed analysis room. "A dedicated team, the best technology money can buy. I want you to build it. Hire who you need. You will be the ear of this family. Alicia. Nothing will happen in Naples, in Campania, in all of southern Italy that you will not hear whispered on the wind first." He was giving me an empire within his empire, not just a role but a fiefdom, my own power base built on the unique skills that had brought me to him. It was a staggering gesture of trust and a brilliant strategic move. My value was no longer just in my analytical abilities. It was in the intelligence apparatus I would now command. The next week was a whirlwind of activity. I interviewed candidates from a pool vetted by Luca, brilliant, amoral tech experts and data analysts who asked no questions and demanded exorbitant salaries. I approved equipment lists, designed workflow charts, and initiated the integration of my new department into Valerio's existing operations. It was exhilarating. I was using every bit of my organizational and intellectual prowess, but for a purpose my university mentors could never have imagined. One evening, as I was reviewing a list of potential surveillance targets, Valerio approached me with a small velvet box. "An engagement gift should be met with a wedding gift," he said, his eyes glinting. Inside the box was a pair of earrings, exquisite pear-shaped diamonds, but set in a way that was slightly too thick, too technical. "They are beautiful," I said, lifting one out. "And they are more than that," he replied, taking it from me and gently fixing it to my ear. He did the same with the other. "They are linked to the new system you are building. A panic button. A twist of the right earring will send a distress signal and your exact GPS coordinates to me and to Luca. A twist of the left will activate a live microphone. You will never be out of my reach, and I will always be able to find you." He cupped my face, his thumbs stroking the jewels now adorning my ears. "I almost lost you before I even had you. That will never happen again." The gift was a perfect symbol of our union. Breathtaking beauty intertwined with ruthless, practical necessity. It wasn't a symbol of distrust, but of a protection so absolute that it bordered on obsession. I loved him for it. The planning for the wedding itself was a surreal exercise in duality. Sophia, Valerio's terrifyingly efficient assistant, took charge. To the outside world, it was to be the society wedding of the year. Dr. Alicia Marino, a promising academic, is marrying the reclusive philanthropic billionaire Valerio Rossi, whose family has a long history of wealth in shipping and hospitality. The announcements were sent to glossy magazines. A famous designer from Milan arrived at the villa with sketches for my dress. We tasted cakes and selected flowers. It was all perfectly normal, wonderful. But beneath the surface, the machinery of our real world was grinding. The guest list was a who's who of the Italian underworld, carefully balanced with enough legitimate business associates, politicians, and celebrities to provide the perfect camouflage. I vetted every name. My new system was already yielding dividends as I cross-referenced financial records with intercepted communications, ensuring that no one harboring even a flicker of disloyalty would be within a mile of us on that day. Security plans were drawn up that resembled a military invasion more than a wedding. Sniper positions were established on surrounding rooftops. Guest identities were confirmed through biometric scans, and a no-fly zone was enforced over the villa. I was no longer just the bride. I was a principal asset, a key strategic node in the organization, and my safety was paramount. My parents, of course, were overjoyed and utterly oblivious. My mother cried when I showed her the ring over a video call, the massive ruby explained away as a family heirloom. "He must love you so much, Alicia," she sniffed, "to give you his mother's ring." "He does, Mama," I said, and for the first time the lie felt only partially false. "He does love me. He just loves me in a way she could never comprehend." The night before the wedding, Valerio took me to the cliff's edge again. We stood in silence for a long time, watching the lights of the city and the dark, endless expanse of the sea. "Are you afraid?" he asked quietly. I thought about it. Afraid of the man beside me? No. Afraid of the life I was choosing, the violence, the moral compromises, the constant vigilance? A little. But more than that, I was certain. I'm only afraid of a world without you in it, I said, and it was the truest thing I had ever spoken. He turned to me, and in the starlight, I saw the raw, unvarnished truth in his own eyes. Before you, I was a king in an empty castle. I had power, but I had nothing to protect, nothing that was truly mine. You have given me a reason for everything. You have given me a soul. He kissed me then. A slow, deep kiss that was a promise and a farewell to our old selves. Tomorrow we would be married. Tomorrow we would be bound together, not just by love, but by blood and oath and the immense, terrifying power we would wield together. We walked back to the villa, hand in hand, the lights of our future blazing before us, ready to conquer the world. The wedding was a masterpiece of beautiful lies. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of the private chapel on the villa's grounds, painting the ancient stone floor in kaleidoscopic colors. I wore a gown of ivory silk, deceptively simple, its value evident in the whisper-soft fabric and the flawless, invisible seams. The ruby on my finger glowed like a captive ember. My father, beaming with pride, his financial woes a forgotten nightmare, walked me down the aisle between rows of guests who represented two parallel Italies. The public one of wealth and respectability, and the hidden one of absolute power. At the altar, Valerio waited. He looked more like a king than a groom, his posture rigid, his eyes for once not scanning for threats, but fixed solely on me. He saw only me when my father placed my hand in his. The touch was electric, a current of understanding and possession that silenced the murmur of the congregation. We spoke our vows in clear, strong voices. It was a vow of protection, of loyalty, of a love that would burn through any enemy. Mine was a vow of the same, a promise to stand beside him, to be his shield as much as he was mine. When the priest pronounced us man and wife and Valerio lifted my veil, the kiss he gave me was not one of chaste celebration. It was a seal, a brand. It was a message to every person in that chapel that I was his and he was mine, and this union was unbreakable. The reception was a whirlwind of champagne and calculated socializing. I played my part perfectly. The blushing intellectual bride, charming politicians and dazzling celebrities with carefully curated anecdotes about my research. All the while, my mind was working, my new diamond earrings a comforting weight, my eyes subtly noting the micro-expressions of the men in the room who mattered, the ones whose loyalty was the bedrock of our power. I saw the respect in their eyes now, not just for the Don's woman, but for the woman who had found Salvatore. They knew. Later, under a canopy of stars and fairy lights, Valerio pulled me into a dance. The orchestra played a soft, romantic waltz, and for a few moments, we were just a man and a woman swaying to the music, lost in each other. "Are you happy, Mia Regina?" he murmured into my hair. "My queen?" I looked up at him, at this dangerous, beautiful man who had torn my life apart and rebuilt it into something so much more vibrant and terrifying. I thought of the power at my fingertips, the love that consumed me, the future we would forge in fire and blood. "I am complete," I whispered, and I was. The girl who had sat in the cafe desperately trying to save her father was gone. In her place was a woman who commanded respect, who wielded power, who loved a king and was loved as his equal. We had just begun our first dance as husband and wife when Luca appeared at Valerio's shoulder, his face a mask of calm that didn't reach his eyes. He whispered a single urgent phrase. Valerio's body went rigid for a fraction of a second, then relaxed, his hand tightening on my waist. He nodded at Luca, who melted back into the crowd. Valerio leaned down, his lips brushing my ear as if sharing a lover's secret. "The Lombardo family from Palermo," he whispered, the music covering his words. "They have made a move, a small one, testing our borders now that the wedding is done." He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching mine. There was no fear in them, only a cold, anticipatory fire. The first challenge to our reign. I felt a similar fire ignite in my own blood. This wasn't a disruption. This was the beginning. I did not ask what the move was. I didn't even flinch. I grinned, a knowing, almost dangerous smile mirroring his own. Then let's give them their first taste of reality, I murmured, my fingers tracing the outline of the ruby embedded in my ring, the crown that symbolized my new authority. He returned the grin, teeth flashing stark white against the dim backdrop, and with a final elegant flourish, spun me around as the music reached its peak. The dance had ended. The game was officially on, and together, turning our backs on the dazzling spectacle of the party, we confronted the shadows, steeling ourselves for the challenge, ready to overcome, ready to reign.